All right. Welcome back to Career Day, the podcast. I'm your host, Adam Zigner, a high school business teacher here at Carlisle High School in Central Pennsylvania. Today, I'm joined by Morgan Klinger. Morgan is a Senior Tax Analyst with Penn National Gaming. Morgan, any other introduction for yourself?
So hi, everybody. As Mr. Zigner mentioned, my name is Morgan Klinger, Senior Tax Analyst with Penn National Gaming. I actually just hit my 2-year mark with the company in November. I guess a little bit more about me. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in accounting from Susquehanna University in Selinsgrove. And I also achieved a minor's degree in legal studies as well. While I was studying there, I earned an internship with KPMG. So for those of you who don't know, KPMG is one of the big 4 accounting firms. My internship was in the business tax practice in the Harrisburg office. And from there, I received a full-time offer. Spent the first 5 years of my career there and worked my way up to the manager level before ultimately deciding to join the Penn team. I also obtained my certified public accounting license in PA. And still actively maintain that license, even though I'm not necessarily working in public accounting anymore. But, yeah.
Very nice. So a senior tax analyst, what exactly is that?
So if it's okay with you, I have a kind of unique perspective in which I worked as a tax professional in both public and private. So I think it might be a little beneficial to touch on both. When I worked at KPMG, we worked on various tax items for a variety of different clients. So I had large multinational publicly traded companies that I worked on, as well as some smaller, privately owned companies. We helped our clients on a lot of tax compliance items, which compliance is essentially, preparing their annual tax returns, federal, state, local, international, you name it, preparing extensions for those tax returns, estimated quarterly tax payments. And then from a non-compliance standpoint, I also worked on a number of tax provision and consulting projects. So I'm sure most of your students have no idea what a tax provision is, but in simplest terms, that is a more or less like a quick and dirty estimate of the value of the tax line items in the financial statements, what that's going to be for the year, both on the balance sheet and the income statement. So tax provisions are a lot of work, but that's probably the easiest way to describe it. And the provision side of things is actually one of the more exciting parts about, my job. But now that I work in private at Penn, I do a lot of those same things, just for my own company now. So I do a lot less compliance things, and more tax provision items, but, I still help the accounting firm that we use, that prepares our tax returns. Like I help them gather the information, everything that they need for the tax returns. But, another part of my job is that we're a rapidly growing company. So a lot of times I'll get pulled into, our most recent acquisition projects. And I'm also responsible for monitoring, any legislative changes or updates for all the different jurisdictions that we operate in. So
very nice.
Wide range.
That actually led me to a follow-up that wasn't on my initial list of questions. I had a student that it just popped into my head now. A kid named Ethan in my personal finance class is interested in accounting and wanted to know, back to the public side of it, when you're working with multiple clients, how do you ensure that they're all getting the amount of attention that they deserve as a client when you're working with multiple people? How do you juggle that side of the business?
Yeah, that's probably the most challenging part about public accounting. And really what it takes is a lot of organization from your end, but also, the different teams that you work with. We would often have status meetings for all of our different teams, to touch on the goals that we had for the week, any upcoming deadlines that we had for each individual client. In tax, a lot of clients might have these same deadlines. So you need to work really closely with your team, who a lot of the time, the resources that you have on your team are in the same boat as you are. They have, the same deadlines for other clients as well. So it's really just a lot of organization, a lot of planning, and using the resources that you have the best way that you can. But yeah, that is definitely the probably the most challenging part about public is balancing all of that. So you just have to be, organized and communicate very heavily.
Right.
Yeah.
So next question. So I mentioned it in our first episode. The biggest thing that we try to get to with the kids here is what a typical day looks like for somebody. So how about now in your current position? What does a typical day look like for you?
So I work in the corporate tax department at the company's corporate headquarters in Wyomissing, which is close to Reading. Since the pandemic, we're working at home, which has actually been helpful because, we work hand in hand with our overall corporate accounting team, which is based out of Las Vegas. So they're 3 hours behind. So, it's a little bit nicer at home because, 8:30 our time is 5:30 their time. So that's been a lot easier since we've been from home in case there's any, later meetings or things like that. But as a tax analyst, I'm part of a team that's responsible for not only corporate tax items, but we work with all of our properties across the country. And we just recently completed a huge acquisition for almost $2 billion that put us into Canada as well. So, but in the United States, I think we have about 43 different properties across the country, and we work really closely with all of those properties on a variety of different issues that come up for them. So I wouldn't really say I have a typical day, which is what I like the most about my job, but we have our deadlines, we have our projects that we're working on throughout the week. Depending on the time of year, that could range anywhere from calculating quarterly tax payments and working with the Treasury Department to get them paid, or responding on notices that our properties get from different taxing jurisdictions on discrepancies that they have, or licensing renewals. We work with our license team just to make sure that there's any tax issues are cleared so that we can get our license renewals, so that we can operate in the state. So from a typical day, it really ranges, but from the year, I would say we're like fairly busy at quarter ends. So like, April, July, October, and then year end, obviously in January, because that's when we're working on, the tax provision items that I kind of touched on before. And we're busier then because, the volume of properties that we have need to ultimately be consolidated into what's going to end up on our financial statements. So, during those times too, we're working with our external auditors, our internal auditors. Any given day, though, I could be in communication with our legal team, like our in-house counsel, our compliance and licensing teams, but like I said, that's probably what I like the most about working in industry as opposed to public, because you really get to work with so many different people within the organization and get to see the ins and outs of the company so much more than you would, in public accounting.
Awesome. So that actually takes me to one of the student questions from one of my personal finance kids. Again, how often, you kind of just touched on this, how often are you interacting with people on a day-to-day basis in your job? And how do you make sure, you're keeping those interactions, especially now where you're doing most of it remotely? How are you making sure those are both professional, which, is always a standard, and then also productive?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I was with Penn for about 3 months before the pandemic happened. So most of my time here has been working from home. So there are some days when, I don't necessarily interact with a ton of different people, but that's definitely not the norm. Like I said, we're working with different properties, different corporate teams, both in Wyomissing and in Las Vegas. We use Microsoft Teams heavily, which is essentially like Zoom, which has been great during the pandemic and the new, work from home environment. So probably the worst part about working from home is that you lose that person-to-person interaction, but Teams has really helped with that. So the most important thing I'd say is that now that we are working from home and you're losing that in-person interaction, it's so important to capitalize on the interactions that you do have. So, I always get on my, video chat and try to just get that FaceTime, even if it's not in person.
Right.
That way that person in Las Vegas, sees who they're working with. And, but, do your prep work beforehand. Make sure you're prepared before going into a call. I'm on a lot of different calls with, a lot of different people from all over the organization. So you just have to make sure you're prepared so that, you can step up and ask those questions when needed, or try to anticipate any questions or action items that might come out of a specific interaction you have with someone, and always make sure that you're following up on the action items. It's so easy when you're not seeing that person in person to just kind of forget about it, but you just need to make sure that you have you follow up on any action items that come out of like that interaction or that call that you have with that person
Perfect.
or that team.
So let's kind of rewind back to before careers, before all of that. Was accounting always your plan?
Actually, no. I had always wanted to be an attorney. And as I got to high school, I narrowed it down to wanting to be a corporate attorney. So I majored in business in college, thinking that it would be good to get my undergrad in business and then go to law school so that I'd have, a solid business background before going to law school, and then, have both of those educations. But since I was in business school, my advisor was from the business school, and she just so happened to be the chair of the accounting department. So when I spoke with her, first week as a freshman on campus about my career goals, she actually suggested that I major in accounting as opposed to just, business administration, because she felt that I would get a better background of business that way. So stuck with my accounting classes. I really enjoyed my accounting classes. And then from there, we needed an internship. So I ended up taking a tax internship because I thought that would be a pretty good mix of both accounting and law. Still thinking, that I was going to go to law school after this. But once I really got into my internship, I realized how much I liked accounting. I really liked the team and the company that I had my internship with, which was KPMG. I thought I'd save myself from another 3 years of school and taking the bar exam, but the CPA exam was just as challenging. But here I am. Yeah.
Awesome. So, a couple other things on here about, why you chose what you chose. Was there any other than your internship, was there, and, your talk with your advisor, was there another driving factor to like the world of accounting? Once you got into that internship, what really drew you and said, okay, yeah, I've definitely made the right choice here?
Yeah, I just I guess more so like the company specifically. Like I just really saw myself growing within KPMG. And there was just so many different opportunities to grow, or different, types of tax that I could get involved in. If I didn't want to do tax returns anymore, I could do provisions, or I could, help clients with any like mergers and acquisitions that they were doing. Like there was just so many different things. And I think too, at the time, what really drew me to the career, which was ultimately at KPMG, was I'd studied abroad in college, and they had a lot of international opportunities. So, at the time, that was something that drew me to KPMG specifically. But I'm glad I chose accounting. The world is always going to need accountants, no matter how advanced technology becomes. They'll always need lawyers too, but I just thought accounting was more fun.
So next one, in the journey from wanting to be a lawyer in high school to meeting with your advisor and kind of deciding to pursue an accounting, degree, was there anybody or any piece of advice that really stuck out to you or inspired you to get to, where you wanted to be?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned my advisor at Susquehanna. Like I said, since she was like the accounting chair, like I had a lot of more personal interactions with her, because she was kind of leading the accounting department at Susquehanna. But I had so many great professors there that like truly took an interest in me personally. And two of them were actually KPMG alum. So they all helped in different ways, whether it was, personal advice or writing recommendation letters. But like I said, there was one tax professor, my tax professor actually, he was a KPMG alum and spent some years with the IRS, and he was an attorney. So I kind of looked at him like, wow, this is me, in like 30 years from now, because he kind of did everything that I had wanted to do with my career too. So I just had a lot of, the good thing about Susquehanna is it's a smaller school. So we had a lot of just like personal interactions with a lot of different professors that gave us, some good advice and some personal stories, and you know but also, I mean, career services too. Like I use them very heavily when I was in school. Definitely don't overlook them as a resource when you get to college. They're here to help. They know about, all the different internship opportunities and job openings and deadlines. And there's a really strong network of alumni. So, I used them very heavily when I was in college, and they definitely helped me to kind of get where I'm at. So even in high school too, your guidance department, they know about all those things too. So they're here to help.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's great. So one person not mentioned there that, maybe not necessarily on your list specifically, but one that I look to a lot now. Morgan and I shared a high school accounting teacher, Dan Frake, who is now teaching in, I believe, Selinsgrove, actually, the home of Susquehanna.
Yeah.
And we always look, and I sent Morgan some questions before this, and one of them is about how accounting is typically looked at, especially by high school kids, as a boring subject, sitting there just looking at numbers the entire time. And
Yeah.
I can remember very specifically some lessons I had with Mr. Frake that kind of made me see the other side of it. There's some excitement there that's built up. And I think that's, important when kids are looking at business careers and accounting specifically, to really show them there is more than just spreadsheets and numbers in it. But as you bring that up, I'll bring that question up. So most of my kids in my accounting classes, or, I'm sure, across the country, high school kids specifically are looking at accounting as a boring career, sitting at a desk, looking at numbers, spreadsheets. Why isn't that really the case?
Yeah, I mean, that's so far from the truth. Obviously I had heard the same, and there's going to be some days when you're sitting at your desk looking at a spreadsheet trying to figure out, how to come up with some type of calculation or where these numbers are coming from and where they need to go. But and it's funny because whenever I tell someone I'm an accountant, they'll often say like, "Oh, you must be really good at math," and I'm like, "No, I'm actually just really good at Excel." But in public accounting specifically, like, I mean, pre-pandemic, but I know they're getting back into it. You're at client sites, you're interacting with clients. You're following your clients real time and what's going on, news releases, press releases, things like that. Like there's so many cool things you can learn about your client. So it's so much more than just, sitting there doing numbers. Like you're really getting to know the clients and the business and things like that. And, for example, something that your class might be familiar with is Barstool Sports. My company partially owns Barstool Sports, and one of my responsibilities as a senior tax analyst was to lead the research and development tax credit study that our company can claim on our federal tax return as a result of all the work that our team did to develop the Barstool Sportsbook app. So I got to sit in on a lot of, pretty cool calls, listening to, all the work that went into developing that app. And, most of it was way over my head, but it was really interesting to learn. And I was like really fortunate to be a part of that project. So, there's so many different things like that. And, I mentioned before, you're working with so many different people too in departments that it's so much more than crunching numbers, but all roads lead back to accounting in one way or another. So, you're going to come across so many different people and things along the way, but it's so much more than that.
Absolutely. A couple of rapid fire ones from some students here.
Yep.
Wyatt's a sophomore here. How do you make sure that you reduce the human error side of it when you're working with different companies or with your company?
Yeah, great question. So for the work that we do in-house, we have a lot of like Excel macros that we use for different templates that we have. So, part of our like quarterly process is we'll send out a template to all the different properties and they send it back. Well, a lot of the people completing those templates, they don't really know anything about tax. They're just, it's data input. And a lot of the issues or the errors that happen is process, right? So we have a lot of macros that have, built-in check figures for us to make sure that everything's calculating correctly. And for the work that we don't do in-house, like some of our tax compliance work, the returns and things like that. Our consultants also have a lot of programs that are built, to automate a lot of things, to reduce the human error. So, it really spanned it. It just, there's so many different programs out there. And, actually one thing that I could recommend to your students, if they're thinking about a career in accounting is, and one thing that I wish I would have done, probably one of my bigger regrets now knowing that I'm spending my career in accounting, is getting some type of either like a minor degree or some type of emphasis in like information systems or data analytics. Because, as things are getting more automated, accountants are never going to go away. You're always going to need accountants, but the programs that we use, and there's so much more data now out there in the world, and things that we need to analyze, that knowing data analytics and computer programming or coding or something like that, it makes our lives so much easier. And like Wyatt had said, reducing human error, like things like that are what are ultimately going to make your job easier as an accountant. So that would be huge.
So Isaiah, he's a senior here, has heard, he's actually looking to get into accounting, potentially as his avenue of, careers in college. He's heard a lot about how stressful accounting can be. And we talked in our personal finance class specifically about, I think I've hammered home to them the date April 15th 100 times. Yeah. He's heard how stressful it can be though. So what ways have you found to handle some of that stress that you deal with?
Yeah, accounting can be so stressful. It's so fast paced. There's things that are changing all the time. So I'm definitely not going to sugarcoat that. It is stressful. And when you work in public accounting, there's always deadlines to meet or unexpected things that come up for your clients that they need, 5 minutes ago. We like to call them fire drills, the most recent fire drill. But when you're in industry, the same thing happens all the time. It might be a little different, but there's always unexpected things coming up all the time. So, and with the pandemic and working from home, it's been a little bit more difficult because before, you could kind of separate work and home and use your time to de-stress at home when you're away from the office. But now your office is home. So you just need to make sure you take some time to put work out of your mind and separate yourself from the temptation to just sit down at your desk at home because you can. I enjoy playing sports and being active. So I would often try to find like intramural or rec leagues to join, even if most of them were with my coworkers, just to get out of the office and do something to take your mind off work. But I enjoy reading and like traveling too. So you really just need to prioritize yourself and your own interests and do things that you enjoy, or else like you will burn out. Like burnout, especially in public accounting, is a very real thing. That's why most firms give you a significant amount of like time off or personal time off, but you just need to make sure that you use that time. They give you that much time for a reason.
Right.
So yeah.
And you touched on the pandemic there. So this is my next to last question, I guess we'll call it. How were you specifically affected by it? In terms of, you said you spent 3 months with Penn before you went, pretty much fully remote. Yeah. And then also, how has it changed the operations of the company?
Yeah. So the pandemic hit us really hard. Last year in the middle of March, we were required to shut down every single one of our properties for several months. I mean, like imagine that. We essentially had zero cash coming in from any of our properties for, months at a time. And even when we could reopen, it was at such a limited capacity. And the Barstool Sportsbook app, we weren't really up and running with that app yet, but even if it would have been, there weren't really any sporting events happening to bet on. So it was a really dark time for our company, but our leadership maneuvered the pandemic in such an amazing way. We immediately had to go into like a cash savings mode and try to reduce our spending as much as possible because we just didn't have any cash coming in to replenish what we were spending. And unfortunately, we had to lay off a number of employees. I was one of the fortunate ones, a couple hundred of us across the country that kept our jobs. But, we did a lot of things like issuing public offering of debt and selling the real estate assets of one of our properties in Las Vegas for rent credits. So essentially not to get too technical, but it was like a non-cash rent payment agreement that we had to try to like reduce our cash coming out. But the way that our CEO and our leadership handled it was honestly amazing to watch. And we have bounced back stronger than ever. There's some really exciting things happening for us, and it's amazing to think about, where we're at today versus last year at this time. So don't call it a comeback, but yeah, no, what a comeback. It's crazy to think about the year like flop from where we were last year to today.
Awesome. My last question is going to be the same for everybody I have on here, whether it's people I've known my whole life, people that I'm just meeting. What advice do you wish that you would have gotten when you were a high school student about going to college, about careers, about life in general?
So this, I guess what I would say, I mean, this is something that I was given, not necessarily that I wish someone gave to me, but I guess I wish I would have capitalized on this advice like a little bit more. So I think it's really important to pass on, but networking is so important. Whether it's old classmates or other alumni that went to your college, contact your professors or your teachers might have. Like I'd mentioned, two of my professors at Susquehanna were KPMG alum. That definitely had something to do with why, I got into KPMG. The person that interviewed me at Susquehanna from KPMG was a Susquehanna alum. So make sure you just go to all of the career fairs, use career services to your advantage. I can guarantee you'll find a job and find yourself successful if you use your network. And don't just stop networking once you find a job. You never know when you might want to take a new job and you might need some help from someone you've crossed paths with before that are going to help you get your next job. And I'll make a connection here too from your first episode with Connor Dietrich. He actually got in touch with me last year about job openings at Penn. So prime example of the importance of networking and using, your resources, but that's so important, especially now as the job market is, pretty competitive. If you have that connection with someone or that in with someone, that's going to ultimately be, maybe the thing that's going to push you over the edge of another candidate to get the job that you want. So super important.
Absolutely. Well, hey, Morgan, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, this is fun.
Have a good one. I just want to say thank you again to Morgan Klinger for taking the time to talk to me today. Also, thank you to those of you who've listened so far, checked out some of the clips online. Some pretty exciting guests lined up in the next couple of weeks. So make sure to check back regularly to see, what jobs I'm exploring, who I'm talking to. You can follow us on social media. All the different platforms are linked here. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great day.